Bernie Sanders represents Vermont in the United States Senate, but now seeking the Democratic presidential nomination. He's representing, or at least resonating strongly with those in the party seeing this election as an opportunity for major governmental changes. More bluntly, Senator Sanders boldly says the nation needs a political revolution. He knows government. 4 terms as Burlington, Vermont's mayor, 8 terms in the U.S. House of Representatives, now in his 2nd Senate term. And welcome back to Iowa Press, your 2nd visit here.
Thank you very much for inviting me.
You know, I've delineated here your political career. There have been some wins, some losses, and over that time you've developed, I think, quite a sense of political smell. What makes this one smell like a victory?
What I think explains the momentum and the energy and the enthusiasm in our campaign all over this country and the huge turnouts we're getting is the people, I think, are sick and tired of establishment politics and establishment economics. I think most Americans understand that there's something fundamentally wrong when the middle class continues to disappear and almost all of the new income being generated goes to the top 1%.
That's the message that is resonating, and I want to introduce, so we can continue the questions here,
sure.
Senator. Across the table, James Lynch, who writes for the Gazette, published in Cedar Rapids, and Radio Iowa's news director, Kay Henderson.
Senator, on the Republican side, we have Republican candidates saying their very first act as president would be to, for instance, tear up the deal with Iran or to rescind every executive order that President Obama has issued. As president, what would be the very first thing that a President Sanders would do?
I don't think there is a first thing. I think what we have got to do is work to create a movement which is prepared to take on the billionaire class, which today has so much power. And what we need is a set of policies designed to expand the middle class and the shrinking middle class that we have seen for 40 years, and demand that the wealthiest people in this country start paying their fair share of taxes. So the agenda that we are talking about, Kay, is a federal jobs program to rebuild our crumbling infrastructure, creating 13 million jobs, to raise the minimum wage over a period of several years to $15 an hour, to make sure that we have pay equity for women workers, to make certain that public colleges and universities in this country are tuition free, and that we deal with this outrageous situation of high student debt, and we fund that by asking Wall Street to pay a tax on speculation of stocks and bonds. So those are some of the directions that we've got to move, I think.
You've also been a critic of recent trade deals,
yes,
and some not so recent. Do you believe as president you would have the authority to unravel some of them immediately?
I think, look, for Vermont, for Iowa, and for virtually the entire country, trade agreements like NAFTA, CAFTA, and permanent normal trade relations with China have by and large been a disaster. I voted against all of them, and I'm helping to lead the effort right now against the Trans-Pacific Partnership. At the end of the day, I think what Americans perceive, and you ask me why there is momentum for our campaign, these trade agreements were written by corporate America, were written by Wall Street. The goal was to shut down plants in America, to stop having to pay workers in Iowa, Vermont, this country, decent wages, move to China, pay people low wages, and bring their products back in America.
But supported by Democratic administrations.
You're quite right. Many of these policies, you're absolutely right, many of these policies were supported by not only Republicans, by President Clinton, and unfortunately President Obama. They are bad policies. They are opposed by and large by every trade union in this country, and I believe by the majority of the American people. At the end of the day, the American worker should not be forced to compete against people in Vietnam who make 56 cents an hour minimum wage.
How do you roll back the clock on those agreements?
Well, you renegotiate agreements. And what you say is, look, we want agreements that work for the American middle class. I want to see, we have lost, just to review, since 2001, we have lost almost 60,000 factories in the United States of America and millions of decent paying jobs. Not all of that is attributable to trade, but a lot of it is. And at the end of the day, if corporations can shut down in America, pay people 25 cents an hour, 50 cents an hour someplace else, that's what they will do. And we have got to stop that. We have to demand they reinvest back in this country and provide decent paying jobs here.
Listening to you, no one would doubt that you sound like a Democrat, but you've always identified as an independent. When will you become a Democrat, or when will you put that D behind your name? And do you have to do that soon?
No, we don't. As it happens, I'm obviously running in the Democratic caucus here in Iowa, the Democratic primary process around the country, and we will fulfill all of the requirements that the authorities need us to fulfill. As it happens, as is the case for Howard Dean, who ran for president, for my colleague in the Senate, Pat Leahy, you don't register in the state of Vermont as a Democrat. You just can't do that. Nobody can do that. What you do, and what I have done for years, is been a member of the Democratic caucus in the House and now in the Senate. I'm the ranking member on the Budget Committee, former chairman of the Veterans Committee, where we work very hard for veterans' rights. And I have helped Democrats get elected throughout the state and throughout the country. So I think my credentials are pretty strong.
But Senator Leahy or Governor Dean didn't say they were independent. They said they were Democrats. Why the distinction?
Well, historically, the distinction is, and the reason that I ran as an independent is pretty simple. Over the years, I think the Republican Party has evolved into an extreme right-wing party controlled by the Koch brothers and other billionaire interests who are really very reactionary. The Democratic Party, unfortunately, over the years has also become, I think, too much influenced by big money, and I preferred to be outside of the Democratic Party and run as an independent. That's how I got elected. And I am the longest serving independent. But having said that, I made a decision many, many months ago, after a lot of thought. I think the last time I was in the show, you probably asked me that question. I don't know. But I decided to run within the Democratic primary process. That's what we're going to do, and we're doing pretty well.
There's been much discussion on the Republican side about when and if Donald Trump might run as a third party because of the groundswell that is developing for his candidacy. Would you feel compelled to have a third party candidacy if you do not secure the Democratic
I made it
nomination?
very, we gave a lot of thought about what we're going to do in terms of this election. And I decided finally that we would run within the Democratic process, and that's what I am going to do. I will not, as I have said many, many times, if I do not win, I will not run as a third-party candidate, period.
When you announced that you would support the pact with Iran, the nuclear deal, you said it's not all that many of us would have liked. Is it a good deal, or is it just good enough?
James, I voted against the war in Iraq. I heard the same evidence that everybody else heard. I didn't believe Bush, I didn't believe Cheney, I didn't believe Donald Rumsfeld in what they were saying. And if you go to YouTube and find the remarks that I made on the floor of the House at that point, sadly, and I say this without any joy in my heart, much of what I predicted about the destabilization of the region turned out to be true. As the former chairman of the Veterans Committee, I can tell you that people do not fully understand the cost of war. I mean, it's not just that we lost 6,700 brave men and women in Iraq and Afghanistan, it's the 500,000 that came back with PTSD and traumatic brain injury. I think what President Obama is trying to do is to do everything that he can to make sure that Iran does not get a nuclear weapon, but do it without another war. I am astounded, I really am, to hear my Republican colleagues go on the floor of the Senate and kind of blithely talk about, well, there's another option. What they're talking about is another war. We were at war in Afghanistan, didn't turn out well. War in Iraq did not turn out well. We do not need another war. Now, I'm sorry,
is this a choice between diplomacy and war?
I think it is. Look, if it fails, who trusts Iran? I don't trust Iran. Nobody trusts Iran. But there are very tight restrictions here in terms of not only releasing, lowering the sanctions, but also the ability to bring them back. So I think you give peace a chance. War is always an option. But in my view, a great nation has got to use every capability that it has to prevent war. War is a terrible thing. And I would like to see us succeed here, as the president is trying to do, without going to war.
You voted for the war in Afghanistan,
yes,
and you voted against both wars in Iraq
yes.
in the early 90s and
Right.
a decade ago. What is the criteria that a President Sanders would use for going to war?
I voted against the first Gulf War when Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait, because I thought with the whole world united against them, the whole world, we could have driven him back without going to war. That was my motive then, and I think I was right. In terms of the war in Iraq, I could not believe the stuff that we were hearing from the Bush administration, and I feared very much the kind of destabilization that would take place. And I voted against that war as well. I voted for the war in Afghanistan because you had a situation where Osama bin Laden was being protected by the Taliban at that point. I think a request had made. He was a criminal. He was not released, and we went to war. So my view is that what we need, by the way, is not the United States, and you can't predict every event that's coming up, but by and large, I would like to see the United States work with the rest of the world, work with our allies in the Middle East, and not have to do it alone.
Diplomacy, though, needs to be backed up, as most view, it needs to be backed up by military strength.
Sure.
Is the U.S. sufficiently militarily strong in order to act that way in leading the world?
Well, I could tell you that the United States now is spending, I believe, more on our military than the next 9 nations combined.
Is it enough? That is, would you increase the strength of the U.S. military?
What I would do is change the priorities of the U.S. military. You're asking me, is it enough? We have elderly people in this country living on $13,000 a year because they don't get enough in Social Security. We have young people who can't afford to go to college. We have people, veterans, sleeping out on the street. So as a nation, we have got to determine our priorities. No, I am not in favor of just simply putting more and more money into the military, but this is what I am in favor of. Right now, you may or may not know that the Department of Defense is the only agency of government which cannot sustain an independent audit. You go there and say, well, where are you spending your money? How many private contractors do you have? They don't know the answer. So before you throw a lot more money into the military, I think you need some accountability, which we do not at the present time have. Furthermore, I think to too large a degree, the United States may still be fighting against the old Soviet Union. Our enemy now is terrorism. It is a very different type of military conflict. So the answer is yes, we need the strongest military in the world. Second of all, I do not believe everything being equal, we should do it alone. We should work with coalition. France is there, the UK is there, other countries are there. In the Middle East, by the way, people don't know this. Saudi Arabia, this will shock everybody, has the 3rd largest military budget in the world. 3rd largest. You know what? Maybe they want to get their hands a little bit dirty in taking on ISIS with our support without us having to have our ground troops there in combat.
There are Democrats and libertarians who have concerns about the use of drones as part of military operations. What is your view?
I am concerned. I think we have seen situations where